join you, I'd just like to tell you that this is the third of a three-part series, and the first one was really about uh, systemic awareness and also awareness of the self in the system. And we this whole thing was about migration, but the first one was really conversational and awareness based. The second one, which was last week, we had a panel discussion which also was very great and insightful, where we had two panelists sharing their personal journeys as well as their professional journeys of working with the homeless, refugees, migrants, etc. And today, having collected all of that information and through conversations, we will try to use one of our tools at Systems Innovation and make sense of this mammoth issue called migration. So, welcome again for joining us today.
Great. Thanks, Maya. Thank you for taking. I think the recording and streaming is taking place now. So yeah, I mean, I won't repeat what Maya said, but we do have some kind of, just because it's quite a sensitive topic. We want to engage the community as much as possible. We'd also like to kind of lay out some sort of guidelines or rules of engagement, just so that I guess we're mindful of how we interact and try to make space for different opinions, different experiences, often very personal, sometimes very sensitive. So in that way, we hope that you will take these, I guess, into account when we talk about our session today. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so. And I mean, our rules of engagement are kind of loosely, we would like to encourage everyone to contribute where possible. We want to hear from as many people as possible. Try to avoid dominating and interrupting, which is quite hard, especially when there's often pauses on the Zoom call and things like that. So that's one part. Try to kind of listen and not necessarily repeat and review in that sense, but just kind of play back and make sure you're hearing a point correctly, just to be kind of aware of that. Try to be curious and caring and open-minded, which is not always easy. We don't know the limits of our own thinking until we hear someone push those boundaries. There aren't really taboos. I'm not sure, we haven't reached taboo subjects yet, but again, something to bear in mind. The idea of self-care is essential. So, taking care to, obviously, if you have limits or boundaries that you're not happy to push, then that's okay. You don't have to share everything, and kind of to listen to one another as deeply and well as possible. So we just wanted to start by having a quick check-in, and we'd love to hear from you guys. You can drop it into the chat if you like. Say like where you're currently at in the world, like your geography, your physical location, or geographical location. And then the second part is that your original country of origin or belonging, or like, is that where you're originally from? So we can just do it in the chat, just for a bit of fun, since we're all talking about migration. And we're not just talking about kind of just refugees, it's all about human movement around the world for various different reasons, although kind of stress induced or kind of critical situations do play a strong part in that. So what do we have? It's just interesting to see what we have. From India, currently in the UK, okay. USA, not the original home, formerly lived in big cities, yeah, thanks Amy. Germany, Rostock, wow, okay, I was born here and never moved away. I wonder if your like genetic and family origins are from the same area. Be interesting to find out. Canada, but now Denmark, wow. And Brussels and Belgium, not my home country. Wow. Yeah, countries from, yep, families from Ireland, okay, I see. And Cecile in Switzerland, but born in France. With
I'm actually just in touch.
And And I'll just share my personal, as I won't type it in because I can't type and talk, is that I'm ethnically Chinese with eighth German, but from my great-great-grandparents, and I was born in England, and I moved to, I'm now in Singapore. So I'm also not of the same sort of place of origin either. But it's nice to hear from you all, and thank you all for sharing. No worries, have your dinner. That food's important. Okay. So with that, we have one sort of story that this canvas is based on that we just wanted to share with you, and why this systems innovation kind of canvas is an experiment for us as well in this session. And the canvas is based on the story of I think it's 6, I can't remember if there were 6 blind men, or a large number of blind men who is a parable actually originated from the Indian subcontinent apparently. And the story goes, it's quite a widely used example in kind of sustainability at least, and kind of systems change. And it says, it's a story of a group of blind men who have never come across an elephant before, and who learn and imagine that the elephant is what the elephant is like by touching it. Each blind man feels a different part of the elephant's body, but only one part, such as the tusk or the side or the tail. They then describe the elephant based on their limited experience, and their descriptions of the elephant are different from each other. In some versions, they come to suspect that the other person is dishonest, and they come to blows, so they obviously start arguing or fighting over it. And the moral of the parable is that humans have a tendency to claim absolute truth based on their limited subjective experience, as they ignore other people's limited subjective experiences, which may be equally true or untrue in that sense. So that's what this kind of canvas is based on. And just to say, obviously, it's not just about a truth, it's also about a perspective, which you can argue whether or not is the same thing. But that's kind of the origin of this canvas, and why we thought it'd be fun to try and use it today. So I will now pass over to Anshul, who will lead most of the session, and myself and Maya, who are part of the Singapore and Mumbai hubs, will kind of support as well. And we had planned to go out to breakout rooms, but depending on the group size, we may be able to just do it as a group activity in this room instead of going into breakout rooms. Over to you, Anshul.
Thanks, Marisa. And I would once again welcome everyone for today's session. And thanks, Marisa, for sharing that story about the blind man and setting the context about the elephant canvas that we are going to explore in today's session. Before we explore that bit, I just walk all of you to the platform that we are going to use is the Myro, just to do all the activities. So if any of you are not familiar with and what are the things that we are going to do, we'll just quickly go over that. So Marisa, if you can just share the screen of the Myro. Yeah. So basically we are going to work on this board where you can see a lot of images of different elephant. One is in the white, one is in the purple, and all this. So we are going to be in this frame. And majorly, if you look at the Myro board, we'll share a link with you. You just have to open it in your browser. And on the left-hand side, you can see a panel where there are different options. One, there is an arrow, then there is a T sign. Then after that, there is a sign, a rectangular sign, which is the sticky note. So our today's session will be using those sticky notes. So you just have to click on that sticky note, and you can grab any color sticky note from there, and wherever we ask you to post it, you just have to click on the Myro, and you can start typing your responses. To zoom in and zoom out, you can either use your mouse as a scroller, or you can see at the right hand side bottom corner, there is a percentage sign, which there are plus and minus sign. You can zoom in and zoom out to look at the overall board that we are trying to work on. So that's a brief about the Myro board, but you are really encouraged to ask questions if you face any difficulties. And if you are not able to access the Myro board, you are highly encouraged to unmute yourself or use the chat box as a medium to post your responses, and we will try our best to put them on the Miro board. With that, let's dive into the sessions right away. Yeah, Marisa, should we go ahead?
Yep.
Okay. So we'll just share the Myro link with you. Marisa, you can space the Myro link in the chat box.
Yeah. Now I have to find it. Yeah. Trying to find the chat box. Yeah.
So I'll just give you a couple of seconds, just everyone, so that everyone can onboard to this Myro link. Let us know if you face any difficulty.
Just to say, if you wander around the rest of the board, it might be a bit overwhelming. So I would highly recommend, because we've just kind of used the same board.
Yeah.
It's a work in progress. So just I would encourage you to sort of stay within the bounds of what we're looking at on the screen, just so that you don't get overwhelmed. That's from our previous session.
Oh.
So I hope everyone is able to join the link, and you are always welcome to ask questions, and if you face any difficulty or if you have any queries, you can post and chat, and we will take those queries. So let's start with, Marisa just shared a story about the elephant canvas. So similarly, in our real world, when we deal with any kind of problem or any kind of complex systems, we always think from our perspective, and then sometimes we look at certain parts of that system. Sometimes it's trunk, sometimes it's a leg of that elephant. Similar manner, like if I have sorry. Okay. So
could we request everybody to stay muted if they are not asking a question or maybe reflecting? Thank you.
So in the large social and economic, or whether it's an environmental system, we generally looked at the different parts, whether it's financial system, whether it's a technological part, sometimes the human aspect, sometimes some other aspect. So in today's session, we are looking at a migration system from a complexity lens, and we are trying to explore what are the different parts of this system that we are gonna look at. So I would invite all of you to the first frame, where you can see the elephant in the middle, and we have posted certain sticky notes around it. So we have written certain systems which are very related to the migration system. So there are healthcare system, housing system, financial system, employment. What we want you to do is, according to you, what are the one or two key actors that play a very important role into these systems? So we want you to pick a sticky and name the actors in those systems. So let's say if you choose healthcare system, what are the one or two key actors that you see play an important role when it comes to migration in the healthcare system? Similarly, for the educational system, likewise for housing system. So just pick a sticky and write down one or two key actors that are important to that particular system that we are going to talk in context of the migration. We can take 5 minutes for doing this activity. If you are not able to type, or if you are having any difficulty, you can also use chat box to type your response, and we will paste it to Myro board. So right now it's 5:49 my time, and we'll just take 5 minutes, and 5:54 we'll stop doing this, and then we'll move.
I've put the timer on. Can you see that
Um,
on the Myro board? Maybe you can't see it. It's okay. It's fine. I've put a timer on. I can tell you when 5 minutes is up.
Yeah. I'm once again pasting the Myro link. People who have joined late, for them, please use the chat to access the Myro link. So I see responses like immigration office in the government system, doctors in the healthcare system, nurses, teachers, then banks and financial institutes in the financial system. Police in government system.
Try and be a little bit specific, because the next activity will be requiring a degree of specificity that we'll ask from you. So when you're putting it down, just think about why you're putting it down. You know, Anshul says it's kind of a key actor in there, or a key role in that system. So try and be a little bit specific, because we will ask some detail.
And also there might be some sense of generalization while you are putting that actor, but just keep in mind, when we are doing this exercise, we are doing in context of the migration. In the context of migration, these different systems or these different key actors play a role.
What's going on there? Oh.
So we have 2 more minutes. If everybody is done, then we can move ahead. We can take a couple of more seconds. So I see a lot of responses in employment system as well, like daily wage employers, workers, companies.
And I would say, sorry, I'm going to sort of contradict what Maya said. Do feel free to come off mute as we start to discuss, providing you don't have really kind of distracting background noise, I think would be the caveat. Because we don't want it to be like, oh, everyone has to be silent until they speak in that sense, and there's a small group of us. So I would say, as long as you don't have really distracting background noise, it would be great for you, you know, to have it feel a bit more like a live in-person session, even though we are actually not in person, not live together. Okay, we have about a minute left. Are we done, or we can move on?
If everybody is done, like, you can give us a thumbs up so that we can move to the next bit before time. Okay. I see a couple of people are still writing, so just give them.
Sorry, Andrew, you've got a bit quiet. Can you?
Yeah, I'm saying that I see a couple of people still writing, so let's just give them 30 more seconds, and then we move to the next part of this activity. Okay, so time's up. Yeah. So I see a lot of, you know, responses in terms of different actors that play a different role, and of course, I mean, if you look at in terms of elephants, different body parts, you see like all these. Some people might see some actors more prominently than the other based on their experiences as a part of the system, as well as their uh, their part that they see themselves in the system. Now moving to the next activity, what we want to do is all these actors also behave in a certain manner in that system, and also they have their own thought process to to pull the system in the certain direction to meet certain objectives and create certain dynamics. So as a part of next activity, we are going to move to the next frame, where what you are supposed to do is you take one actor, key actor, and you are gonna think from that actor's point of view, and you want to write from a ecosystems thinking contest, like how that actor will think in an isolation for his own benefit. So let's say if I take a doctor, how will doctor think in that system from his own self-interest point of view? And I want to write down those perspectives in the next frame. So you can pick. Yeah.
Sorry, can I add something, Andrew? Just
Yeah.
so that think about what is their purpose as well in the system.
So for an example, like in a financial system, someone can see money making as a primary objective. Similarly, for other things, they can see their own primary objective, which is driven by their own self-interest. And when you are writing that perspective, just also mention the name of that actor for which you are writing, so that we can know for whom you are writing. So for an example, I see a person writing, can this person afford so the treatment? So I think this is from one key actor's perspective. So write down who is that person. So like doctor is that person. Then there is someone who has written, are they qualified as they say? So this is from whose perspective? Who is that key actor who is thinking this? So we'll take 10 minutes for doing this exercise. You can pick any number of actors that you feel you want to take from the previous exercise, and write down from their own perspective what they think from their own point of view. For people who are just joining us, I'll just brief you what we are doing. So we are doing this using the elephant canvas to understand migration system from systemic perspective, and we are using this link. You can join the link. And the activity that we are doing right now is we are picking some actors that we have labeled in the previous exercise, and writing from their own perspective what are the how they think, what are the things which drive them to act in their self-interest.
Just say that we do acknowledge that we are, to some extent, kind of making assumptions about some of the thought processes, attitudes, behaviors, and purposes of some of these actors. So we acknowledge that. The idea is kind of more of a thought exercise to demonstrate the sort of thinking around this and the canvas itself. So we're kind of we're not saying that everyone thinks like this. We just generally, what are some of the kind of patterns we may see, or some of the prejudice or biases or ways of thinking. They're not all negative, of course, So within the kind of process of migration and people moving from one system to another system, if they were to move from one country to another country and were to come across, interact with these different systems, what would the actors in those systems, when they come across them, what would their perspectives possibly be?
So I'll just repeat again. So we can take as many as actor from different system, and what we are doing right now is um, we are writing down how these actors think from their own self-interest, which we are saying ecosystem thinking. So for an example, a financial actor belonging from a financial system might think money making as a primary goal, and he might be driving from that money making perspective. So similarly, so I see people writing very good responses. So someone is writing like racist might think stop migrants to keep power, which is a very interesting point. Then similarly, employer might think in a different ways. Government might think in a very different manner.
And some of the behaviors or the as Anshul said, the objectives that they may have, and what is their motivation, what is their kind of underlying drivers, I think is a really important one to think about.
Those drivers can be in terms of their mental models, the belief systems, the values that they carry, and the other things.
Or maybe it's a factor of the organisation or institution that they're part of and the function that they perform there as well.
And you can use your own experience, like if something you have experienced somewhere and you feel you want to bring that out here, you can do that as well. It might not be very something which is very assumptions based or which is very hypothetical. We'll take 1 or 2 minutes, and then we would invite um, any of you who want to share why he or she chose that particular actor and their thinking process, and want to explain that. We'll just take a couple of responses from you. We have very interesting, beliefs and the things that people are writing. Anyone want to unmute themselves and want to share why they chose that actor and from where they are coming, so that we can also understand the context and it can help group to think in a certain direction and drive the discussion. Anyone would like to volunteer? Or should I pick some sticky and point out if they want to speak? So since we are talking about migration, I'll just pick one response who is from the migrants' perspective. Build a safe life, send money to family in my home country. This very, interesting thought process, and something which also came out, in our previous discussions when we were having like the sole purpose that migrant come to a different cities, or even in a different country. But I would invite uh, the person who has written this, and if he or she want to share their perspective on that.
On which one?
The migrant, build a safe life, send money to family and home country.
Yes, I have written this one. It's something I picked up from a conversation with someone who came from Africa.
Okay, that's great. Do you want to highlight a little bit and give context, like when you picked up that conversation, how did you feel, and what was the thought process that was going in your head?
Yeah, it was at a party and we were playing games and it was just a side conversation. But yeah, I felt kind of sorry. And
Thanks for sharing that, Andy. Anyone else want to share? We have someone writing from the international schools point of view, provide education for student and migrants and migrants, and introduce them to country's education system. What so if you want to highlight, like how did you come up to this thought process of there? Did you come across any from your personal experience, or if you have heard somewhere, or what is the thing that drive this kind of thought process?
Um, can you hear me? Oh, I'm actually an international student, so when I first came to Canada, I did my grade 12 in an international school. So I guess that would be considered an actor in that sense.
Thanks for sharing that. We'll take one or two more responses and then we can move. Melissa, yeah.
Sure. Actually, I've put quite a few, I would say, offensive post-its there. And I do this because actually I've been helping a few people getting through their immigration processes. And it's amazing how there is a total lack of understanding from the perspective of the government and so on, with all the good reasons, so-called good reasons that I put out there, which is at first was to me like totally infuriating. And then I realized that sometimes just giving a phone call or leaning on people, just because you are a Westerner makes it possible, which I find actually even more mind-boggling, really. But we need to be aware of that, because when people in the government, for instance, are exposed to the situation on and on and on and on, rather than trying to go further, and most often the system doesn't support that, they just try to insulate themselves and come up with some very simple one-liners, which I put out there.
Thanks, Stephen. So, I mean, as we can see, when we mapped out different actors and when we moved to, from actors to their perspective, we see like a lot of, perspective which is coming from their self-interest. And it's very diverse, which makes this system very complex, and which makes this system to behave in a certain manner where different kind of situations or with different kind of scenarios might arise for, people who are coming from who are migrant, or who are going to be migrant, or who are living in that kind of a conditions. So as a part of next activity in this workshop, what we are going to explore is we have certain situations, okay, and which are arising mainly due to all the perspective that you have written here, because of these contradict, whether the perspectives are contradictory, whether those perspective has some synergies or are not in synergy, but those situations are arising. So as a next part of the activity, what we want you to make in the group. So Marisa, can we make groups, or should we do it like a group activity, like as a single group?
I think it's okay to do it in a group. I think that would be better. There's only 14 of us. I think it's better discussion if everyone's happy with that. I think
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then what we are going to do is you can pick. So if you move to the next frame where yeah. So what we are going to do is, so we have, you can see a leading node, like a parent node, and from that node you can see many different branching outs. So what we are considering that parent node as a one of the scenarios, and then we are trying to explore what are the first order consequences and the second order consequences of that scenarios. So for an example, because of these different perspectives and the different, this conflicting mindset, the scenario arises, I cannot work legally, and because of this there are first level consequences, and then those first level consequences might also have a second order consequences. So what we have prepared some situations for you. We can pick either one or two situation, and we want to explore what can be the different first order and the second order consequences for those situations. Marisa, if you just go to that slide where we have written different situations. Yeah. So as a group, we can pick two or three, scenarios, and then we want to explore what are some consequences that arises because of that scenarios.
Sorry, Anshul, we can also add about what we heard from our first and second sessions, right?
Yeah. So these scenarios were also based on the conversation that we had in our first or two one the workshop, and the second was our panel discussion where some of the things that came was like, I'm a national of island of St. Helena, because of which there was some sort of passport related issues. Then because St. Helena is a British overseas territory, which is a colony of the UK. Then some was there was a scenario where the migrant were like, my same sex partner is a Jewish American. So we are in that situation where societal acceptance, and then we face a lot of other struggle that came to in our daily life. So based on that, we have curated some 5-6 different scenarios, which are predominantly related to the different systems that we were talking in the first frame, and then we want to explore out of those scenarios what are the different consequences that can emerge, the first order and the second order consequences. Marisa and Maya, we can facilitate it together, like just to lead group in a direction, like what are they supposed to do.
Okay, sorry, are we okay? So yeah, just to say, we can take one, or we can either relate it to our own experience, something we've experienced through the process of migration, or in our interactions across different systems, to say, okay, I as Anshul said, maybe you didn't qualify for working legally, and then what happens? What is the knock-on effect, the cascading effect of that one thing, because of the system or because of a certain way of thinking that created a policy that then didn't allow you to do something, or that didn't adequately kind of include yourself or your family or somebody within a system. So that would be the exercise. We can do it together if we're good for that, or we can do it individually. And we'd love to hear if somebody has an experience that as a starting condition that said, this is how you fit or don't fit in, and what were the consequences, or what are the possible consequences of that. So it's slightly a kind of imagination exercise as well to broaden our thinking.
Yeah. So you are just supposed to, be on the frame where we have written different scenarios in the red sticky. What you can do is from those red sticky, if you create an arrow, it will sort of make another sticky where you can write the first order consequences.
So the colors mean something, although they're all green. So I apologize. This was this is number one. Sorry. Yeah. Well, anyway, they go from lighter to sort of more murky green as they go in order of kind of consequence. But it doesn't really matter. You can visually represent that as well. Is everyone clear on that activity, on that kind of instruction, as it were, as part of the workshop?
Marisa, I'm just trying to put up one more example so people can again align with what's happening. So I've just used this example of I can't get treatment. I can't afford treatment for my health condition since I can't get medical insurance.
Yeah.
I've just taken that from the stickies, that the situations that we had. And so probably the second order can be that I can't get treated for my condition, or I go to a faith healer, something like that. So this is just an example so that people are clear on what they have to do. And like Marisa and Anshul said, please don't restrict yourself to these examples, but anything else that you feel is a situation that you have had to face, or somebody has had to face because of the migrancy, and what has been second order effects or consequence of that. We can do that, and we can take some time because we really want to get to the finer nuances of this.
So we can take further, 10 to 15 minutes for doing this exercise. So just pick a scenario and try to draw first order and second order consequences of that scenario.
Be something that you've experienced personally. I think that's often a really good way to bring to life something that that affects you, because you actually experienced the first, second, third, fourth order consequences of that thing.
And for anybody who'd rather talk and share about their experience, or somebody who wants to chat, type in the chat box, please feel free to do so in case you're not able to chat on the Miro board, or just feeling lazy to do so or anything. But please let that not dissuade you from participating. Thank you.
So we have a response in chat from Jesse. So one of the, I think the situation might be here, the main struggle that migrant face just because of the unfamiliarity with the new environment they find themselves in. If that's the situation, and because of that, there might be, consequences like learning curve to bound to be slow at first, but laying foundation for rapid progress ahead.
Jesse, do you want to share more about your point of your question? Would love to hear from you.
Well, I'm a natural systems scientist, and I study how learning curves begin and develop. And there's so much going on. A curve doesn't say much, but in the actual process of changing from one world to another, there's a lot of steps, and they start small at first, and then pick up as you get your footing. And I expect that's part of the experience of any migrant in any location, where they have to discover new rules of the road and try to figure out what to do with their cherished beliefs and relationships that are broken or altered. And we all go through that. And it's one of the things that seems to be missing from human culture is seeing the challenges ahead is something that we need to learn about. But I don't know. That's sort of off the top for me. Those are some of my ways of thinking. I unfortunately tuned in late and didn't see as much as I would like of your ways of thinking. Does what I said connect with anyone?
I think it's definitely true. Yeah, I think people. I mean, there is definitely a learning curve. I think in what we're doing for this particular workshop, it's really thinking about rules, structures, processes that stop or inhibit or that are missing, that don't include or on conversely, actually help people to thrive within the context of moving. So, if it was saying, okay, well, unless you are able to earn above a certain threshold, you're not welcome in this country as a migrant, for example, working, right? And so that kind of point, what is the implication of that, right? The implication of that is you don't get high quality talent necessarily, even if it's an emerging field, right? That would be an order of consequence of that. And then what's the consequence of that? Your national kind of or collective intelligence may not benefit from, and your economy may not benefit from, external ideas and new ways of seeing things, for example, right? And what's the consequences of that? You become less competitive as a country, right? And then what does that happen? Your economy doesn't work, your people don't grow. So in that sense, that's the idea of the kind of workshop. So you haven't missed it. Your point is definitely relevant and part of that human trajectory, I guess.
Yes, I agree entirely. The learning curve matter is that learning is an exploratory process. It's doesn't come from pressure or promises or whatever. It's actually poking around and finding the new parts that will fit with where you're going. And so it works both ways for immigrants and the people trying to deal with them. It's a learning process of how to discover the new relationships that need to be built, and it goes slowly, but it with persistence and creative learning and exploration of who the new people are on both sides, because you're dealing with new people in both directions, learning to get along. Now, some people will sprint and other people will drag and need help, more help. But it's always a discovery process. And
for sure. I think, the idea was obviously to learn learn, I mean, practice with a canvas. So we're hoping that, you know, what we're hoping this canvas does, or not just this canvas, but the whole set of activities, is that they help people to, when people are thinking about designing things, right, they're thinking of ideas, they're thinking of policies, they're thinking of rules, they're thinking of products or services, whatever, right, that are part of different systems, that they just explore the implications and how far those implications can reach. And sometimes it's not a direct implication, it might be something that happens a lot further down the line. And that, as again, that could be a positive thing, and it can be a slightly negative thing as well. You know, it can be something that inhibits sort of thriving and growth, or it can be something that actually, you know, is there to help maintain balance and order, for example. I mean, they all have different. So what we're just trying to do in this is just to try, hopefully, and give people a tool so that they can use this to, like, in their work, right? To practice in their work.
Right. Well, certainly brainstorming, you know, with record keeping is great in lots of ways, and you can follow threads of learning in that. One of the other things that I just occurred to me is that learning comes from listening in part, and so listening to your environment is not actually a rule or that you can follow. It's a practice that you need to develop, so both sides in the relationship between migrants and a community hosting them, listening to how their environment is responding and feeling. One of the things I've been studying recently is that people have really pretty good survival instincts and relationship instincts in environments they're immersed in. But environments they're not immersed in, that they can't read the cues from to environmental stresses and dangers, they get in real trouble. You know, I think that's one of our problems with the world, that we don't hear its cries, don't feel it. And because we're so abstracted in our theories and calculations and concepts and so forth. And, you know, if we listened more to our local environments, we might also start hearing our global environment. I don't know. That's sort of my line.
I think a lot of people would agree.
Thanks.
Also, one interesting insight, you know, once you map all these first level or second order consequences, what you might also see that these first level and second order consequences might generate different kind of situation, which might be related to, you know, the situation which somebody else is working. For example, let's say if I start with a situation of I do not understand how things works here, and that has a consequences on, you know, whether, as Jesse was saying, your learning curve or any other thing, which might create a new situation where you might find yourself into getting access to more local healthcare services or getting work permit or any other kind of a thing. So so the point here is that because of those different perspectives, you know, these different actors bring from their own self-interest, creates a situation which has the consequences, and these consequences again create certain situation where, you know, it becomes really difficult for the migrant person, a person who is coming from a different background or from a different country, to come out. And then these things just keeps on going in a very vicious cycle. And we can take, I mean, a couple of more examples if anybody would like to, you know, share what situation they chose, and then what are the different consequences that they have met, and whether they can relate, like, are those consequences can further create a different situation that someone else might have chosen. are you able to draw any parallel between those things?
Can we treat refugees as migrants? Because ultimately they do turn out to be migrants after some point in time, right? By force or by change of geography. Just a higher level thinking question.
Yeah. So so in our this whole workshop, we have defined different kind of migrant, where we are talking from a refugees perspective, we are talking from an expat perspective, we are talking someone who is actually moving from one culture, who is transitioning from one culture to another culture because of certain reasons. And in that sense, I think we can consider refugees for this session as a migrant, and bring different perspective around that.
Although it's interesting, your question is interesting in that, even if we may want to, practically, there are so many aspects when there is a truckload of difference between who you would term a refugee versus who you term a migrant, in terms of access to healthcare, education, so many other things. So that's the nuances and the deeper layers that we try to explore through these series.
If you want, I can contribute something that I wrote about working without a work permit.
Yeah, please.
So I know this lady, for instance, she doesn't have a work permit and she works as a maid in hotels. And in Brussels, actually, she told me that almost all of the hotels use maids that don't have a work permit because they don't have to pay them as much. And then, when the workload goes down, they don't come to work, and then they call them whenever they need them, they pay them whenever they want, and that kind of stuff. Then sometimes the police comes, they have to hide, and they have to hide quickly because otherwise it's going to be a problem for the owner of the hotel. And I'm not talking about small hotels, I'm also talking about big international chains, okay? So you see that there is a horrible perfect storm, where the need for making money and available workforce that doesn't say anything because they have to make a living, that creates a parallel economy, and in the end there is I've seen myself, stress-related problems, health problems connected with that, because how long can you go on with that, knowing that on top of this, as you're going through the process of being integrated in the country, the bureaucracy is very high. I mean, you have to run from one place to another to get a paper that you can get. I mean, you can imagine the nightmare. So, and it's actually, either you let people in or you don't. But if you let them in, it would be really nice if the people who are looking at this part of the elephant would, consider the reality of things.
Thanks, Stephen, for sharing that. And I mean, it's really interesting, like how one thing led to another and can create a multiple scenarios itself. And the multiple scenarios can be self-perpetuating, so that, those are having a multiple orders of consequences, and then creating a wider problems because of, and it's originating because the key actors are thinking from their own perspectives and thinking from their own self-interest. So that's what we wanted to highlight till now, that, when we talk about the complex system, there are multiple parts of it, and people think from their own judgments and from their own experience, and which create a different problem in this system. But then the questions come, how do we change this whole perception? How do we, integrate all these things, which brings us to a new way of thinking, which we are saying as a ecosystems thinking. So right now, this consequences, when people were thinking from their self-interest, we were saying as an ecosystems thinking point of view. Now, if we have to change this whole scenario, we have to think from a more of an ecosystem perspective, where these key stakeholders that we have mentioned can consider all these wider consequences, as well as can think their own role and their own, how their own actions are creating this these wider consequences in the system, whether they are intended or whether they are unintended. So as a part of this session, we will move forward and we'll try to bring that new perspective. I mean, Marisa, if you have anything to add here, please do that. Otherwise, we can move forward with the regular session.
No, I mean, the hope was that actually what we would do is kind of put a scenario, put the second order, third order consequences, and then try and connect them as a system, right? To see that if you don't have the right paperwork in one part of the system, for example, through the process of migration, that then impacts, as you said, Stefan, your ability to work. And that's one aspect of the person experiencing the lack of ability to work legally, for example. And then there would be this idea, as you said, that maybe like they're continuously on high alert because they're not really able to properly hold down a job or work properly and safely with that feeling. The long-term consequences of that are on the person's health as well, right, as you said. So the idea was to try and connect some of these, which isn't easy to do. And that's the whole point in a way, as in, we would love to think it was easy for people to imagine what the connections are. But actually the idea is that you map them in a way that everyone gets to see, oh, okay, we are all interconnected and interdependent. So I don't have anything else to add to that. It was just, that was the kind of activity. I think it's quite a difficult thing to do with what we're talking about. But yeah, I mean, we can move to the next part if you're happy to, I'm sure. We are.
Sure.
Jessie is also, she's put up a comment here. So if you'd like to speak about that a little before we move on.
Oh, well, I just, I see that you're doing a lot of exploration. I've been reading some of the connecting issues, and those are good, lots of good ideas about what might work, but the migrants and hosts are dealing with real, not imaginary situations, and so something that might help with that is to offer ideas about how each group can still keep its own values and ideas that they cherish, and explore other things, and basically just repeating my idea that learning is an exploration process that you build over time, and having like, I don't know, some, for example, having ways for migrants to communicate their experiences, or having hosts communicate their experiences with each other and with migrants, and sort of facilitating the flow of experience.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I mean, yeah, we are also, this is still work in progress, but thanks for sharing your thoughts.
Oh, well, I was very attracted to the announcements. I'm late. I'm so busy these days. I've been forgetting things. Yeah, my main focus really is on why the world is producing more and more migrants. That's what I initially thought the subject might be, but it hasn't really come up. It's very valid to work on how to heal the wounds, but what's causing the wounds, and that's a whole other subject that I'd be happy to collaborate on if anyone's interested.
Thanks, Jesse, for sharing that. I think that's a really great way of putting it. I mean, that why world is producing so many migrants is like a very broader questions, and I think it's like it's a big exercise itself, and that can be explored in a detailed manner, and we will also try to bring that aspect. We also can think like how that can be done, whether any kind of tool or framework that we are producing can be really helpful for doing that, or is there any other things that we have to do. But that's really interesting idea. So
Yeah, should we move on then to the next
yeah,
part of the session?
sure. So so as we were saying, like when we are thinking from, when these different actors are thinking from their self-interest or egocentric point of view, there are different situations and the consequences that happen that has to be faced by these migrant people. But how do we change this thing? I mean, how do we bring more different perspective? What is that different perspective is something that we want to explore as a going forward, and which we are saying like from a, we have to move from a very egocentric point of view to more of an ecosystem centric point of view, where these different actors can think of all these different parameters and different aspects of system which are very interconnected in nature. So Marisa, if you go back to the frame where we are gonna talk about, yep, last two. Yeah. So when we think from an ecosystem thinking point of view, we keep ourselves in the center and we say how all the other system around me will work for me to benefit me. But when we say from an ecosystem thinking point of view, we say that I see myself as a one of the element of the system, and I see how I can work in synergy with the overall system so that overall system can move forward to a in a better direction. And keeping this thing in mind, now we would invite all of you. So you have written from an ecosystem thinking point of view, what are the things that they have to think? But now we invite you to, like, if they have to change from ecosystem to ecosystem, how their thought process will change. What will be the different parts that they have to see, all these actors, so that we can avoid these different scenarios, or at least can figure out the solution for these different scenarios that arises because of this complexity and different dynamics of between the different actors. So quickly, we can take 5 more minutes just to bring our thought and try to consolidate our things. Like if we have to transition from ecosystems to ecosystems thinking, what are the things that these actor has to do? What are the some thought process or mindset shift that needs to happen? And you can write your responses in the box where we are saying ecosystem thinking. And just to keep in mind, when we say ecosystems thinking, it involves um, not only humans, but every species on the planet, as well as different cultural and the values and different parts of the system that we are talking about. So we can take 45 minutes and put down our things, and then we can move towards uh, wrapping up our discussion and reflecting today's session. If anybody wants to speak and want to share something, they can share. If they don't want to type and want to speak, if any thought that is coming to their mind regarding this.
If someone who hasn't spoken yet wants to share something, we'd love to hear from you.
There are really interesting insights, like what is that we are not seeing, taking into that account? What are the missed signals? What are we missing? Become aware of the surrounding system. Do you want to share the thoughts around that and explain?
That would be me again.
I didn't realize that.
Sorry. But if you want, there is you know, in systemic coaching, there is this whole notion of what's the voice of the system? What is it saying? Because the system is always working perfectly. So what is it saying when it does what it does? You know, and then what are the different actors that are in the system not seeing? I mean, that's kind of obvious, but the moment we're aware of that, then we become aware of what are the signals that we can push one way or the other, or what are the signals that should be maybe paying less attention to. And regarding the boundaries, I mean, we tend to have like tons of preconceived ideas and all kinds of stuff about what boundaries are, and it could be on any level. And if we start revisiting them, then all kinds of great stuff may happen. And the last thing, which is also connected to what Jesse was mentioning earlier, like becoming aware of the surrounding systems, because the moment we start seeing things from different, I mean, we're looking at the elephant here, but like we're looking at all the elephants behind that elephant, and then it becomes more exciting also, definitely.
Thanks, Stephen, for sharing that. Anyone else apart from Stephen want to share? Like, how do we move to ecosystem thinking, or what was the thing that these actors has to do to move to ecosystem?
I don't know if it's easy to move from ego to ecosystem thinking. I mean, yes, it's important, but I have like a two-part view on this, and I don't know if it's dichotomous, but for example, ego exists within ego, because if you look from an external standpoint of view, if you're solving for an external person, any problem or anything, or looking at it as a very objective view, then it becomes very easy to give a very good analysis or view the entire system as a whole. When you're within that system and facing the problem, like how we were identifying earlier, that when you are doing the consequence 2, 3, 4, then you really don't see the system. At least I don't see it. I mean, it just you can't see the system, because the problem is so huge that that's the idea, right? I mean, you're not going to convince yourself that, okay, the system works like this, so it's okay if I face this problem. So I don't know, it's still there's this interdependency on ego and ego as well, and it's a little complex to sort of unravel it. I mean, that's just my thinking, right?
And
Thanks, Ayush, for sharing that.
sorry,
Yeah,
I
Marissa,
have a question. So given that, are you saying is your kind of thing saying that you can't have one without the other, or more like it's impossible to get outside of the system to see it, or like if you're within it?
No, I'm not saying it's impossible to get out of it. I'm just saying that it depends on the circumstance and the position that you are at that point in time. So if you are facing the problem or the circumstance is very heavy on you, then I just feel that sometimes you don't see the entire system. You don't, even if you understand it, you don't want to understand it probably, because you want to solve for your problem immediately, right? That's the solution you need. But if you're looking at it from an objective point of view, where you need to sort of address somebody's problem, then you might say that, okay, look, I can give better advice or consultancy to somebody and say, okay, look, this is how the system functions. So this is what I'm saying. I mean, you just play a part accordingly, but you need to be very careful with how you operate. I just feel it's complex. It's not easy to navigate that space.
Yeah, for sure. I think so. I agree. I mean, I think what was, I guess, useful is obviously having that sense of empathy, and even if you haven't experienced it, okay, trying to find out as much as possible. Or you can't design for everything. I agree. It's not possible to be able to predict every single thing within every single circumstance, be able to solve every single problem. I think there's a degree of that growth we have to go through as human beings to be able to accept certain things that we can change and accept certain things that we can't change. I guess we're always hoping for improvement in the things that we can change, that mean that fewer people are excluded. What we heard from a lot of the stories of our visitors or our kind of panelists and guests were that a very, very sort of focus on kind of maybe efficiency or just kind of blinkered perspectives meant that people weren't necessarily included where they could be, and where that builds a richer ecosystem of people or ideas that actually contribute to a more, I guess, interesting space as well, rather than just kind of keeping everything, in terms of kind of agricultural terms, like monocropped, for example. If you think of the diversity that we get even in the SI community, we have so many different types of people, and everyone has different strengths and everyone does different things. So yeah, I think it's also very complex, and I think that's part of existence, isn't it? That's just a part of the law of existence and nature. Yeah, for sure. Okay. Does anyone else want to share anything? We haven't heard from you, Johanni. See your name there.
Yes, I'm here. Thanks. No, I'm just this time I'm just interested in listening your thoughts around this. Yeah, so maybe I will share some thoughts later on.
Yeah, no pressure. I mean, it's more of a doing workshop, you know, so that other people get to try and use a canvas for you know, in their work and in their kind of their own doing, I suppose, their own practice. So it's okay.
I wanted to talk about the one I wrote. I'm not too sure because it was based off of what I understood from the SI London lecture. It's as in the SI London lecture, he mentioned how with complex systems, we think in like linear systems where there's like a single cause and then there's a single effect. And then in complex systems, from what I understand, it's more or less patterns that are interconnected and self-reinforcing. Is that how, is that a better way to understand it?
Is it a better way to understand it?
I'm not sure if I understood it too well because I was using that understanding to say like understanding the nonlinear patterns that reinforce and produce our problems. I guess, is that wrong or is that?
No, it's not wrong.
No, so that, yeah, in some ways we've also tried to follow that trajectory with the workshop. So when we just asked with the first activity for each one of us to just think of some actors in the migration system and how they would probably think or their perceptions, that was wanting to show or showcase in some ways the linear thinking like you're mentioning. And afterwards when we thought that when we bring in the experiences of a migrant or somebody who's at the receiving end, then we have asked you, or Anshul has asked you to go back to an ecosystem thinking and think what that does to you. So I mean, in the interest of time, we are not going too much back and forth, but what we wanted to probably do was that if we revisit the frame above, where we said what a doctor would be thinking, what a policeman or activist would be thinking, etc. We wanted people to, again, let's say from an ecosystem point of view, what do you think they could think like, or how does their thinking change? So yeah, and I agree that this is not probably, this is too much to chew in one session, but even if we can get people to start thinking from both sides, I think we've achieved a lot of ground. But thanks for that clarification, Hakeem. And I hope what I'm saying is making sense.
Oh, I see.
So what you've said isn't incorrect. It is correct. Okay. I mean, we're just, this is kind of a whole workshop, but the principle you're talking about is that like we have a way of thinking, and then what we think manifests itself, and then what manifests itself kind of, it keeps reinforcing that self-reinforcing feedback loop that I think is what you're doing, which what your post-it says, right?
Yeah, and I'm guessing that's how ecosystems work. It's more like patterns that are reoccurring and reinforcing. The results are also the inputs.
In ecosystem thinking.
Oh no, in ecosystems, like I guess like the results are also the inputs of the system. So it's like reinforcing.
I would not in ecosystem. I think like in ecosystems, there's diversity, there's like, it balances itself out generally, right? If we don't have the ecosystem kind of thinking. Does that make sense, or am I not understanding what you're saying?
Oh, we could just go. We could just keep going. It's fine. It's I kind of get it in a way, but I don't want to like hold people up too much.
It's okay. It's okay. I mean, the session's here for experimenting and discussing and learning. So that's okay. I would say we can stop recording if, I mean, we've got a little bit more to go, but we can take it offline and have a chat if you want, or, you know, you can come to other sessions. But yeah, how should we are at 9:30. Do we have a bit more to do, right? And sure. Or...
I think we can move on to any reflections or any learning anybody want to share, and then we can close it.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
I'm saying we can move on to if there is any learning or reflection, if anyone you want to share, and then we can
Okay.
wrap up our session.
Okay, so should I move the board, or how should we do it?
Yeah, I mean, we can just share. I think that would be the best.
Sorry, share the board or verbal?
I mean, verbally. I mean, we can just share. Yeah. Any takeaways anybody wants to share, or any reflection from this whole exercise? How do you feel? Is there any interesting things that you noticed, or any good thing, bad thing, any learning, insight, anything that you want to share? I see Jessie is writing a lot of things. I mean, she's talking about how do we take this canvas into field and experiment with the migrant itself to bring more, you know, open, to do the more open group discussion, if I'm getting you right, Jessie. Anybody wants to share their thoughts, learnings, anything, please.
Again? I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
I'm saying if anybody wants to share their learnings or any thoughts after doing this whole exercise, it would be great to hear.
Okay, what do we think of the canvas? I think is a good question. What do we think of the canvas? What do we think of the ideas? I think rather than asking people, do they want to, because everyone's quite quiet, we focus on questions of what do we think of the canvas, or the idea behind it, or, you know, anything around that. Does anyone have a thought that they can share? Why did they come to join this session? Why did, you know, are they working on migration issues? No, Stefan is.
Or if anybody has attended all the 3 sessions, how was the experience overall? Was from starting from the first session that we did about the awareness, then second on the panel discussion, and then bringing all the learnings and insights in workshop form.
Can I speak again? I was working on the other session, so I couldn't attend. I'm very happy to be here because it's been a long time since I could join any of systems innovation events. You know, it's always nice to be there. I think it's okay. My own perspective is that the elephant is a great tool. In a way, it reminds me of something from many years ago, which was called the 6 Hats. You know?
Oh God, by Edward de Bono.
Yes. But, you know, I think this one, I like the elephant better because it's more open, okay? And it's less mental based. One thing I appreciate about this is therefore, you know, all the benefits that we can derive from being able to work with this. And then I could hear in the back of my mind, something screaming, yes, but, you know, kind of the judgmental mind, you know, which is always saying that it's not going to work, and then you think about this and think about that. I think it's really nice to actually warn people, and I really appreciate also, you know, what you said at the beginning, you know, like to set the stage. But at some point, maybe it would be nice, and I'm just finding it out right now. Tell them, wait, because your judgmental mind is going to be screaming at you the whole time. Notice it. See it speaking to you, because it's also saying something, right? But being able to notice it and not act upon it makes it much more powerful, because then you can move through different parts of the elephant much more freely, because otherwise people always stay stuck basically in one space and don't want to move so much out of it. Sorry for speaking so much.
Not at all.
Yeah, it's good. I think yeah, it's yeah, I mean that parable is a very powerful one as well in itself, isn't it? I think that's a really good way for us to try and remember that, even when you're discussing things with other people around what is an opinion, what is a truth, what is a perspective. I mean, it's all but kind of the same, isn't it? I mean, from a philosophical level, a truth is a perspective, is a reality. So yeah, I think it's a really powerful parable in that sense. Yeah. I see something in the chat, sorry. Okay, sure. Okay, we've come to past our session. I'm going to turn off the recording just so that we stop